Hello, hello. Welcome back to Miss Wood Reading Online. Okay, I just got back from a little bike ride, so I'm a little winded, trying to get some physical exercise and some intellectual exercise at the same time. Welcome to our new people who are watching this video for the first time. I know that I have a couple of you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for checking in with me and telling me that you were going to get online. I do want to take a moment and thank our publisher of our book, which is Harcourt Incorporated, for allowing us to read this online and post it online temporarily while we are doing this remote learning. Today we are reading chapters 19 and 20, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Chapter 19 is entitled The Runaway. So I can already tell you right now there's going to be something that's going to happen, probably with one of the animals. I'm hoping they're not going to get loose. I'm hoping, and if they do, that they get him back, because I know they need those animals desperately. All right, so here we go. Heave away ho, heave away ho. The men bent their backs to the job while Will called the tempo. When the gun was halfway up the slope, he signaled a pause. So they're trying to get the guns up an incline like this. So when it's halfway up, they probably put some logs in there to keep it from rolling backwards and took a little break. Holding the taut rope in one hand. A taut rope means it's pulled all the way straight. So if I have like my phone cord, which you can't really see, and it's got a snag in it like this, I can't really see it a little bit further. Here, let me do this. Oh wait, I know what to do. Here, let's use my mouse. So if something is taut, it's done like this. This would be with slack, this is taut. So T-A-U-T, new word for you today. Holding the taut rope with one hand, he used the other to dash sweat from his eyes. He was dripping wet in spite of the cold. His back ached and his shoulders burned with pain. After a short rest, Will grabbed the rope with both hands and started his crew working again. Heave away ho! Heave away ho! The teamsters had been at it all day, struggling through an area called the Greenwoods, a 12-mile stretch thick with evergreens. There were no marked routes here, only a vague Indian footpath snaking across hill and dale. There is no way around all of this, Henry said to Will. There's no possible detour. We have to imitate the Indians. Sorry, it was hyphenated, so I had to do both sides. To imitate the Indians and go straight up and over. So something that you need to know is the Indians would have automatically found the smoothest path because this is their natural habitat and they had been there for a while. So he's saying let's follow the paths that the Indians would have put into place. Ooh, I'm sweating from my bike ride. Sorry, guys. First, the men cut down the smaller trees, chopped away the underbrush, creating a wide path up a steep incline. Then one by one, with the extra men on each side to help, the lighter loads were pulled up the slope by the animals. It was slow going, but finally the small guns were all at the top. A different plan was needed for the heavy cannons. The horse and oxen were unhitched and led up the slope. The big weapons were rigged with long ropes. These were carried up the hill and looped around stout trees and brought back down to the work parties. Finally, each gun was hauled up pulley style, inch by inch. So that's a science term, guys. When you guys did your simple machines, a pulley system would have been one with like a wheel, and you pull like this, and it makes it easier for something to move up the incline. And by the way, hauled is a wordly wise word, so it's kind of cool. Will and his crew had been hoisting a 13-pounder, and they were relieved when the gun finally reached the summit, or the top. Nearby, a second party was at work, raising a giant brass siege mortar, and they chanted together as they heaved on the straining rope. Resting on the ground, Will watched the mortar crew. Young John Becker was climbing toward them, carrying a bucket and a tin dipper. Pa thought you might all fancy a drink, JP said to William. Grateful, the men gulped the clear spring water, and some tipped the dipper over their heads, letting the cool liquid run over their sweaty faces and necks. After they had had their fill, JP hefted his bucket and started toward the next group. Ho! Look out! There were sudden shouts and loud crashes, and everyone turned and stared. The rope hauling the siege mortar had parted. The gun came hurtling down the hillside. Can you imagine this huge heavy cannon rolling at you coming downhill with nothing to stop it? Shouting and swearing, the men scrambled as the heavy gun crashed downhill. It felt like a juggernaut, a mad brass beast bounding and bouncing wildly off rocks and tree stumps. Smash, crack, boom! Down it came, faster than fear, a solid ton of doom, crushing everything in its way. JP, carrying his water bucket, saw the mortar racing toward him. As he turned to run, his foot got caught on a tree root and he went sprawling. So guys, he's flat on the ground right in front of where the cannon's coming. Will streaked towards JP. He dove and he grabbed him and fell to one side with the boy as the juggernaut, or the cannon, hurtled by, missing them by inches. The bucket that JP had dropped was smashed to splinters. So if Will had not pulled him out of the way, he'd be dead. With a thud, the cannon came to rest at the stream at the foot of the hill, its muzzle gaping at the sky. The young boy coughed and sat up slowly, the breath knocked out of him. Have you ever had that happen to you? It makes you panic a little bit because you're like, because you can't get the air in. There was a gash on his forehead and blood trickled down his cheek. Grunting, Will also sat up, clutching a badly bruised knee. The men came running. They crowded around, all talking at once as they helped the dazed pair to their feet. JP thanked Will haltingly, stumbling shyly over his words. Pa Becker grabbed Will's hand and he pumped it vigorously. So he's shaking his hand like really hard, like, thank you for my son. Henry pounded him on the back. That was quick thinking, he said to Will. The colonel tried to sound gruff, but he beamed with pride at his younger brother. Later, they climbed down the hill and looked at the runaway cannon lying in the stream. This is the last one, said the colonel. So let's start moving it. This time, I want it double roped. With the mortar fully rigged, Will still limping, insisted on pacing the crew. He grabbed the rope while the others fell in behind him. Then he began to chant, "Heave away ho, heave away ho." The brass mortar slowly crept up the rough slope. Will Knox's strong voice, calling the time, rose in the mountain air and drifted through the silent pines. Chapter 20, the chasm. Okay, so guys, if you have two huge mountains and then you have something in between that's like goes like this down, that's a chasm. So if I had my hands like this, imagine that my hands are forming mountains. This space in between is a chasm. It's like a huge opening. So whatever they're about to pass through, it's going to be a huge opening. From an upper window at headquarters, maybe this isn't about the cannons at all. We'll have to see. If we're talking about headquarters, that doesn't make sense. Maybe there'll be a shift and it'll change over. From an upper window at headquarters, Washington could see Howe's troops in the harbor. For a while, he studied them with his telescope, and then he closed the glass and he went downstairs. Remember, there's nothing going on right now in the battle. They're just staring at each other. They're having a standoff. Outside his office door, the sentry, that's another wordly wise word, guys. The sentry snapped to attention. Washington took note of the man's smart appearance and drew comfort from it. Yes, the Continental Army was making progress. It was beginning to look like a real fighting force, but they still needed artillery in order to fight. At his desk, Washington stared at the calendar and frowned. Time was running out. From his spies in Boston, he knew that the British reinforcements were not top-grade forces, but there were quite a lot of them. Enough now for Howe to launch his attack. The commander drummed his fingers on the desk. Where in the blazes was Knox with his cannons? How much longer could they wait? Taking a fresh sheet of paper, he began a note to General Schuyler in Albany. He mentioned the enemy's reinforcements, which worried him. And then he confided, open quotation, "I am in hopes that Colonel Knox will arrive with the artillery in a few days. It is much needed." Close quotation. Guys, that is actually a sentence from an actual letter that George Washington wrote. So that would be a primary source document right there, that little line. It's cool. The general would have been even more worried if he knew that while he sat riding, Henry and his men were facing another crisis. Oh, so it is going to be about Henry and his men, and that was the segue or the lead in to the new portion of the chapter. The convoy had fought its way over the hills past the mountain hamlet of Otis and the village of Blandford. Their next goal was Westfield on the east slope of the Berkshire Range. From Westfield, the path would be easier, but right now they were on the rim of a steep chasm that dropped straight down for hundreds of feet. Guys, if they slip even the slightest, they're all going over, and they're not going to be good. The travelers were at a dead halt. What a word to use. If you go over, you're dead, and they use the words dead halt. The travelers were at a dead halt. They'd met up with bad terrain before, but never anything this dangerous. So this whole next section is going to be man versus nature, and I'll show you all the pages in a few minutes. Standing at the edge, looking over, the drivers shook their head and grumbled to each other. Finally, an old-timer named Thorne spoke up. "'Tain't no way to get down off this cliff, Colonel. No, sir. Not a man among us says it can be done." Henry frowned. "I know it's bad, but the ridge runs south clear into Connecticut. There's no way round, not for miles. We'll have to take the chance." Thorne grunted. "All of us is strong for the cause, Colonel, but we didn't sign up on for suicide." Another driver chimed in. "Just getting the animals down is nigh impossible, and if a load ever broke loose, there'd be blue ruin for sure." So, death. The argument went back and forth. For almost 3 hours, Henry coaxed and pleaded, but the men wouldn't budge. Will began to think that the mission was doomed. All of their work had been for nothing. But the colonel refused to quit, and finally, in his stubbornness, plus some new practical ideas from Will that saved the day, the men agreed at last to tackle the chasm, though few of them expected to succeed. Will's plan of action matched one they had used before. This time, he added many safeguards. The animals were unhitched, and then they were led, sliding and slipping down the steep incline. Meanwhile, the vehicles were rigged with heavy ropes which looped around big trees. Drag chains and guy ropes were added to help the crews steady the loads as they went downhill. Okay, so now, guys, what's going to happen, just so that you can kind of get a mental picture, they need to go down this incline. And let me imagine that my sunglasses are the wagon. Let's get one that you can see better. Let's imagine that my pink highlighter is the wagon, and this is a tree. So what they're going to do is they're going to go like this, and they're going to tie a rope to this tree so that it only goes a certain distance. And then there'll be another tree, and they're going to tie the rope to that tree and go down. So they're going to tie it off in little increments all the way down. Does that make sense? So they're going to have a stop and go, stop and go, stop and go, stop and go, so that these don't go wheeling down too fast, that they only go a few feet at a time, so that it's safer. Meanwhile, the vehicles were rigged with heavy ropes which were looped around trees. Drag chains and guy ropes were added to help the crews steady the loads as they went downhill. Now, under the colonel's sharp eye, each gun was lowered little by little. Every 50 feet, fat logs were wedged under the wheels, because that's going to stop the wheel from moving. Fat logs were wedged under the wheels and runners to hold the load in place. Then the man ran ahead, shifted the heavy ropes to trees farther down the slope. The tricky process was then repeated. J.P. Becker, working alongside the older hands, kept an eye on his hero, Will. In spite of his bad knee, the colonel's brother was everywhere, limping alongside the ridge, giving orders, testing ropes, and making sure that every gun was moved safely. The troopers and drivers, remembering the runaway cannon, worked hard and took no foolish chances. There were a few snags and tense moments, but no accidents. As the long hours passed, the men's confidence grew, and even Thorne had to admit that the colonel had been right. They were beating the chasm. By nightfall, the whole artillery train was safely at the foot of the great hill. Not a single gun had been lost, nor a man injured. At that point, Henry called a halt. "I'm right proud of us all," he said to the crew. "Let's eat some supper and get a night's rest." And that was one decision in which there were no arguments. All right. Okay, so let me go back to 19, and I'm going to go ahead and show you the chapters here. So if you want, you can just pause. I got to make sure I have it in the right where you can see it. Okay, and then here's this page. So you guys can just pause the video, do the markups. Next page. Make sure this can be seen. Next page, guys, just remember to pause the video because you won't have time to do it. Okay. Oops, can't see. All right. Oopsie. My fingers out of the way. This whole chapter's man versus nature, pretty much. Ta-da! All right, so that's our reading for today. Please be ready for the Zoom lesson on Thursday so that we can have a great discussion about our chapters. And remember that you will be taking a quiz on Thursday as well, just like you did on Tuesday. So be ready for that. And peace out for now. I'll see you in class on Thursday. Okay, bye, bye, bye.